find yourself traveling along an old dirt road in your town, or even in a place you've never been, try to imagine the things that have happened there and who might have lived there. The dirt road you're thinking of might be tree-lined, bordered by thick forests and hills with swamps on either side. Or maybe it stretches off forever in a straight line through a dusty desert. Your imagination probably doesn't take you to actors, rock stars, and even drug traffickers. But there's a reason they say truth is stranger than fiction. My name is Anthony Cherdelli. I'm a journalist. Well, a sports journalist, living in Southern California. I'm about to tell you a story about the dirt road in Vermont that I grew up on. When I found out the truth behind the urban legends about this small part of Sharon, Vermont, the place where I spent a lot of my childhood, my mind was blown. This is True Stories from an Old Dirt Road. As you heard in that last episode, the old dirt road in Sharon, Vermont that I grew up on, and my house specifically, saw some interesting characters visit in the mid-1960s. Brandon deWilde and his buddies used my house in Sharon as a country escape from the lights and pressure of show business. If that were it, this story would be interesting enough, but it's not. It's not even close. Because a decade later, about a quarter of a mile down the road, another group of soon-to-be world-famous musicians visited the house next door to the one we would eventually move into, where deWilde and friends hung out. It was all thanks to a young couple by the name of John and Jerice Bergstrom, who opened Suntreader Studios. Suntreader was the recording studio where the band Foghat recorded its hit song Slow Ride, and the entire album it was released off of, called Fool for the City. You probably know Slow Ride from the local classic rock station. Well, actually, that's kind of outdated now. If you listen to classic rock, Spotify, or XM radio, classic rock stations, that's how you'd know Slow Ride. Or, equally likely, you know it from the 1993 comedy Dazed and Confused, which follows a group of Texas high schoolers on their final day of school before summer in 1976. Dazed and Confused was studded with classic 60s and 70s songs, but Slow Ride has perhaps the most memorable moment. Right before the movie ends, freshman Mitch Kramer, played by Wiley Wiggins, gets home after experiencing his first high school keg party, among other things, and his mom confronts him. Mitch very unconvincingly denies everything, lies down in his bed, and pops on his headphones. And right then, Slow Ride fades in as Mitch closes his eyes with a satisfied look on his face. And who could blame him, judging by what he just experienced? The movie closes with Slow Ride blaring as we get the final scene. Randall Floyd, David Wooderson, Ron Slater, and Simone Kerr, played by Jason London, Matthew McConaughey, Rory Cochrane, and Joy Lauren Adams respectively, ride off into the sunrise the next morning, high-fiving and laughing.
Have you been drinking?
No.
Are you drunk?
You might be wondering why a couple opened a recording studio in the middle of nowhere. Well, I interviewed Jerice and her husband John to get all the details about their experiences working with Foghat and many other bands. Unfortunately, Jerice passed away a while after I interviewed her. I didn't know her all that well, but from our interview, you'll be able to tell she seemed like quite the firecracker.
It was my husband's idea. John has a background in engineering, and I have a background in music, so this was back in the early 70s. Mm-hmm. Nonetheless, we had those backgrounds, and he was sitting in the room one day, and he said, I think I'd like to have a recording studio. And so we figured it out and found a couple of friends who were also interested, and the four of us started Suntreader Studios.
What was your background in music?
I was a trombonist, and there weren't too many female trombonists. And it was not really, I was not encouraged to continue.
Gotcha.
And so I didn't. And I went on to entrepreneurship, and that was it.
When you and your husband decided you wanted to do a recording studio, was there anything there already? Like, did it exist already? Did you build it from scratch?
We built it from scratch, but we had a foundation already because it was 115 acres and we were going to build a house there. So we had a 52 by 32 foundation, and then the builder up and left with our money. So we were just stuck with a foundation for a couple of years. And then we decided, well, that's where we'll put the studio, and we figured out how to do that. It took cajoling and coaxing of banks and other money people, and there we had it.
How did you go about building a business there? Like, Sharon strikes me as a pretty out-of-the-way location.
Yeah, well, I thought that was if we were going to put it there, we'd have to market it as being out in the sticks, out in Vermont, in the middle of nowhere, as a alternative to being in the city, where almost all of the recording studios were, other than Nashville. It was L.A., San Francisco, and New York. There were one or two in Boston, but not really anything of note.
Reading the bands that recorded there, how did you kind of go about making the connections and making people aware of this recording studio in Sharon?
Well, we had a lot of luck. There's a musician named June Millington, and she was in the group called Fanny, Fanny, which was semi-popular at the time. It was not widely known, but it was known to us. And she was on her way back from Maine to where she lived, and I think still lives, in Western Massachusetts. For some reason, she heard about it and stopped by, and she started telling her friends. She was living in Woodstock, New York. She now lives in Western Massachusetts. And in Woodstock, New York, there's a lot of bands like The Band and many other musical types. And one of them was Nick Jameson. He went on to produce Foghat at our studio a couple of times, and his own solo recording, and he touted us to everybody that he could, and he was very good to us that way. Another producer named Craig Leon he was in Miami, and he was working with Suntreader Studios down there, and he was done with Miami. Came up and tried it and liked it a lot, and he gave us several acts recorded there too with him. And it just sort of blossomed from there, it just word of mouth mostly. We didn't do too much advertising, as I recall.
Here's something I wondered when I started hearing these stories. You might be wondering the same thing. It can't be a coincidence that famous musicians and an actor who wanted to be a musician chose the same small town. And not just that, the same road to hang out and play music. But that seems to be the case. I asked Ian Dunlop of the International Submarine Band if he knew anyone from Bearsville or knew anything about Woodstock, New York. He said his brother had lived in Woodstock, New York, but never mentioned anything about Bearsville Records. Shockingly, it seems like a random coincidence. I also spoke to Nick Jameson, who played bass for Foghat and produced Fool for the City, along with a number of other projects at Suntreader.
I was there with Foghat. We went there for about a week, and then we came back, did another month there. So then I did my solo record there, and I was there for quite some time. Yeah, better part of a year, I don't know. Then I did a record by a guy named David Anderson there, and we were in and out for a few months. So I spent a good amount of time there. For my solo record, I actually lived there in the studio. I've been a musician pretty much all my life. Then I got into engineering. I was in Philadelphia. I built a little studio in the warehouse that my band used to practice in. Then I got a job at Albert Grossman's studio, Bearsville Studio. And he had the company Bearsville Records too. So I started as an intern, worked my way up to engineer. And then I started co-producing and then producing. And then Foghat wanted me to mix some things on their first album, which I did. And we started a good relationship. And I ended up producing their third album, Rock and Roll Outlaws. And then they asked me to join the band, which I did. I said I'd do it for a year. And so we did Fool for the City. And I think June Millington, yeah, it was definitely her, of the group Fanny, the first girl group in the 60s, the first girl rock band. They were quite good. Told me about Suntreader. And I don't think anybody was doing anything up there yet. They had this state-of-the-art, beautifully designed room. So we went up to take a look at it. And I thought, oh, man, this is great. because I had a big, pretty live room, and I was getting into, using room mics and stuff like that. Before a lot of people, I might say, way before Zeppelin, all that stuff. And so I was attracted to that. They had an API console, which I thought was a great rock and roll console. And I just generally liked it. And we liked the idea of being up there in the country. So I think Roger and I went up there to take a look at it. Then we went up and we cut 3 songs. We cut Save Your Lovin' from Fool for the City and Slow Ride, and a song called Going to the Mardi Gras, which we ended up never using. And then we went on tour with Rod Stewart and came back and finished the record.
What was your first impression of that part of Vermont?
I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was gorgeous. I mean, Sharon was very small. I mean, it wasn't a town as so much as a diner and some houses. But I liked it. River running right by it. It was a small stream, really. I used to walk around there. It was gorgeous. I can't remember what time of year it was. It wasn't winter, though. It was pretty nice. I think it might have been summer or late summer. And we rented a house outside of Sharon a little bit, a great big house, and it was lovely. We really liked being up there, recording up in the woods. So my impression of Sharon was, this is great, It was right across the way from Hanover, New Hampshire, which is great, bookstores and restaurants and stuff like that I liked. So I was impressed.
By the time Foghat recorded at Suntreader, they'd already put out 4 albums. 3 of them had been certified gold, but nothing would compare to the success they had from Fool for the City.
They hit it big with us, but they were moderately known. Their most recent, before they came to us, album was Rock and Roll, which was a picture of a rock and a picture of a roll. And it was, not terribly successful, but it was successful enough that Bearsville Records wanted them to continue, and so they did. And Dave Peverett, who was the lead singer of Foghat and also a guitarist, he had been successful along with their drummer, Roger Earl. They had been successful in a group or 2 in England, which names are escaping me. But I believe he was one of the co-authors of the hit, It's the Summertime and the Winter is
Oh, yep.
I think that he either wrote it or his brother wrote it or something like that. I can't remember now. It was a little while ago. And so because they had sort of established themselves semi, when they came to us, they were really gobsmacked because we had a 24-track studio in the middle of nowhere, which the only other place there was a 24-track studio nearby was in Boston, and that was a wreck. It was not a very good one. So they were happy with it and spread the word.
Did that technical kind of cutting-edge equipment have to do with your husband's engineering background?
Yes, I would say.
For Slow Ride, we had come up with that in Long Island. Dave came in with like an acoustic demo, and I kind of arranged it, and we played it through once and taped it, and we just improvised basically everything that we hadn't figured out, and it came out great. Then we didn't play it again. We went up till we went up to the studio. We fooled around with it a little bit. Then we did one take, and the power went out. On the record, it's quite a long song. You have the song, and then it breaks down into a sort of a bass solo, and then a big build-up, all of that. The power went out before we got to that. The power went out right after the song part, the basic song, the single version, you could say, ends. And we couldn't play it back for about 5-6 days. And we just hung out in the Holiday Inn, and all thought it sounded good. What do you think? Oh, it sounded great to me. I don't know. We might have to do it again. We had no idea. Then after the blizzard let up, and we were able to go up there again, we played it back, and that was it. That was the take. When we came back to Suntreader, we recorded the second half and spliced it on.
So it was a snowstorm that caused the power outage.
Yeah, huge blizzard. I mean, it was major. We weren't the only ones that had our power cut. we literally couldn't do anything for almost a week.
So you mentioned the Holiday Inn. How did you bide your time during that blizzard? Do you remember what you did to kill time?
Yeah, every night we'd go out and see a Monty Python movie. I think it was Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. And we just saw that like just every night. Other than that, we just hang around and jam and, write songs and whatever.
Gotcha. Do you have that might have been it, but a least favorite part of working in that area, whether it was remoteness or anything that you remember just being like, oh man, this is kind of annoying?
Not really. The available food in Sharon was not the best, but there were, nice restaurants around there. Roger used to cook up food at the place sometime. I can't say I have any negative memories of it at all. It was really idyllic.
Speaking of food, there was one quirk that Jerice was shocked by.
I do remember that we were surprised and ill-prepared for them to all be, not all, they were vegetarians, and we didn't understand how rock and roll stars would be vegetarians. And also, they were very hard-working. All of the successful bands at the studio were very hardworking. Rock bands got a bad rap, I think, for being sort of druggies and stuff like, just sort of fuck-offs. But
yeah,
they were not. Although, there were plenty of acts who came to us that were druggies and fuck-offs. So I understand that.
For the Bergstroms, hearing Slow Ride on the radio was great. But because they also knew what went into the recording, they were overly critical about the quality sometimes.
John and I high-five each other, but we know or at least I know, every note in every song that we ever recorded. So I can tell when, for instance, the fidelity isn't quite up to it, or the fidelity is better, or somebody, chops it up a little bit. It's easy for us to tell, or for me to tell, the radio edit from the album edit, stuff like that.
Yeah, I read the radio edit was shortened to like 4 minutes. The album is 7 or 8, right?
Something like that, yeah. I know that Nick Jameson, the producer and bass player for that, he went out, he took the master recording and put it on a cassette and went out, it was a cassette, went out to a car to listen to it to see what it would sound like in a car. And nobody had ever done that before, so that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's smart.
When he recorded Foghat live at our studio, actually he mixed it at the studio, he recorded it live, obviously. He put in the crowd sounds first, and then he made the album so that it would all sort of gel, and it does sound like it's all in one
performance.
I did ask Nick about the shotgun incident involving Bob Mason, Dennis Mason's dad. Remember?
A classmate of mine, Bruce Jager, was over there, and he was a technician type for a musician. Mm-hmm. And they put the speaker on the end of the house, on the gable end, looking right this way. And my dad liked his peace and quiet in the little yellow house. And they had it on at night because they'd be partying and drinking, smoking, whatever they did.
Yeah.
And he'd go over and he says, you guys better find a quieter pastime than that. And they said, well, no, it's pretty tough. And he says, telling you, keep it down or I'll be over with my hunting rifle.
Oh, boy.
Or whatever he said.
Yeah.
It was probably kind of a smooth blend, so they got the idea.
More veiled thread.
And I guess they changed their pitch. They sent the music another way.
Although he didn't remember that incident specifically, he said he did put the speakers outside, but not for partying purposes.
I don't remember the neighbors doing anything. I do remember, that was me putting speakers outside. I used the big room for the drums and put everybody else in little rooms. I think I put Rod's amp in an attic upstairs. I put Dave's amp in the kitchen. I was in a closet, my bass, and we were all standing in the same room, but our amps were different places. And then when we'd overdub, I was just so into using natural spaces because in those days we didn't have all that fancy ambience and reverb you have now where you can create any kind of space you want. We just had an echo plate. So I think what you're referring to is when I put an electric guitar amp outside for Fool for the City, that song. I put it outside, I mic'd it, and then put another mic about, 40, 50 feet away, and it just gives this great kind of openness to the sound. But I did acoustic guitars out there too. For the vocals, I would use room sound of the vocal too. I'd came up with this trick of compressing the vocal and not compressing the room sound. So when Dave would sing loud, it would get roomier sounding. That kind of became the trademark sound of my Foghat productions. I'm trying to think of what other spaces in the room we used. Pretty much every square foot of that room got used for something, and the outside too, and of course the parking lot. But neighbors, I didn't even know we had neighbors. I don't remember the neighbor incident.
After hearing the details about Foghat recording Fool for the City, the most memorable story for me came when they tried to record a sound effect for the song Drive Me Home.
In those days, we didn't have samples of sound effects. We didn't have, access to huge sound effects libraries on tape. So if we wanted the sound effect, we had to make it. And we'd already done on Rock and Roll Outlaws the sound of a jaguar roaring past a microphone for the song 8 Days in the Road. And this one, we wanted somebody drunkenly driving around a parking lot. And so we just got ourselves a cheap car and drove it around the Suntreader parking lot, crashing it into trees and rocks, and we beat the hell out of that car. But it sounded great, it was very percussive sounds, so I still get a kick out of hearing that.
It was the song Drive Me Home. It was the Foghat song Drive Me Home on their Fool for the City album. And they wanted to have a crash. So we had a bulldozer, and they bought a piece of shit Fiat, and they ran it down that driveway and smashed into it as hard as they could. And they didn't wreck the car the first time, so they did it the second time. And they recorded that whole thing, and it's actually in this song. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Fiat is still out there I'm not sure, in the field, if there is such a thing anymore there. It was in the septic system is where it ended up. Roger Earl, the drummer, he had a Lamborghini, and he drove that up to the studio, which, we were all amazed because it's dirt, probably still is dirt. And we, offered to crash his Lamborghini into the bulldozer, but he was not really too interested in doing that. I'm trying to make light of that. He was, no!
Yeah, I gotcha.
From the sound of it, Earl had a lot of fun driving his Lamborghini around the dusty dirt roads of Sharon. In a 2010 Motor Trend feature on Earl by K.S. Wang, the Lamborghini was mentioned. In that article, Earl says his favorite road trip was Sharon, Vermont. That's quite the compliment, because Earl seems to be a bit of a gearhead. Here's the section from Wang's article, Celebrity Drive, Foghat drummer Roger Earl. Under the subheading Favorite Road Trip, Wang wrote, quote, "Of course, one of Earl's memorable road trips included driving fast in the middle of the night. This time, it was on a country road in the middle of Sharon, Vermont in 1976, while Earl was recording the Foghat Live album, which would later go double platinum. Earl gave Motor Trend a play-by-play of his late-night drive through Sharon, saying, quote, myself and our lead singer at the time, Lonesome Dave, had just finished doing some mixing on Foghat's live album. We were up in Vermont, and I was in the Lamborghini Miura SV. There was no radio, the heater didn't work very well, and there was no AC and no seatbelts. They finished up at the studio at 4 a.m. and headed back to Long Island. Wow, that's quite the drive. It was a beautiful night, and the roads up there are really nice. There was nobody around, and I had a couple radar detectors, so I felt fairly confident that things would be all right, Earl says. He was driving 130 to 140 miles per hour, and it started to rain. Earl said, quote, so I decided maybe I should slow down a bit. These early Lamborghinis didn't have brilliant electronics, and the rain got inside, and all the lights went out, he laughs. We were in the mountains doing 130 by now, and I said, Dave, push the door open. That way we go with the solid yellow line. I figured the yellow line is where the shoulder is. It was pretty exciting. Earl drove in the pouring rain. It was pitch dark and the headlights on the Lambo were out. He drove along the yellow line in the mountains until they could pull over. I get the flashlight out. We opened up the front of the car where all the fuses were. Dave's holding the flashlight for me, and we put a piece of silver foil alongside the fuses, and lo and behold, the lights all come back on. It was probably one of the more exciting moments, Earl laughs. Having grown up there, I can tell you, driving 130 miles an hour, even if it's on the interstate, is totally nuts. Doing it without headlights, in the rain, in the dark, is tempting death. For having been the location where a song that's popularity has transcended decades was recorded, it's hard for me to believe that Sharon isn't as well known for that as it is for being the birthplace of Joseph Smith. If I were the people who ran the town, I'd at least make it the town motto, something like, "Welcome to Sharon, where life is a slow ride." Or something corny like that. Sorry, that's my dad humor. And while Foghat was their most famous band, there were still some other well-known artists to record there. Folk singer Arlo Guthrie, son of Woody Guthrie, recorded music at Suntreader as well. Although Jerice didn't have many interesting stories about him, there is some interesting stuff I found while I was trying to figure out what he recorded there. It's not listed on any of the databases, but I think I know. It seems like Guthrie recorded part of his 1979 album Outlasting the Blues at Suntreader. That's listed as being recorded in North Brookfield, Massachusetts, but as we heard, Suntreader was state-of-the-art, so it makes sense that Guthrie may have traveled up I-91 or I-89 for a couple of hours to get to Sharon if he needed to do something he couldn't do in Massachusetts. In order to figure that out, I went back and looked at a couple music industry trade magazines from the time, specifically Cashbox. A November 1979 article confirmed Guthrie would be recording at Suntreader. Outlasting the Blues was recorded just a few months later, so it stands to reason that Guthrie traveled to Sharon to record at least part of it there. But there was another crazy coincidence in that article. Literally the sentence above it announces a live album from who else but the Flying Burrito Brothers. The band Graham Parsons started before his death and after visiting Brendan deWilde at my house in Sharon, which was next door to where Suntreader would open about half a decade later. Obviously, this seems like a complete and total coincidence, but it is a little eerie. I'm going to do some more reporting on that. I'll let you know if anything ever comes of it. One last thing that made me laugh during my research. That same Cashbox article mentions that Guthrie was recording at Suntreader at the same time as Gino Socio. Not sure how to pronounce his last name. He was a disco producer from Quebec, a famous one. I'm not sure if he was working with Guthrie, but according to Cashbox, they were both there. Socio has a major claim to fame, at least to me. He was the executive producer of the self-titled disco album Le Fleur, which was Montreal Canadian star and Hockey Hall of Famer Guy Lafleur's disco album. In 1979, Lafleur recorded this album, which was bizarre to say the least. In it, he just spoke, like spoken word, about his career and how to be good at hockey with a jaunty disco background tune. He wasn't singing. I'm not kidding, listen.
Remember that backhand shots are more difficult because of the curved stick.
Yes, you can do it. You know you can do it. Baby, all you gotta do is try.
When attacking a goaltender, never carry the puck in front of you because he knows you cannot shoot from that position. The goalie takes one look. He reads deke or pass, and he backs up. Don't tell him what you're gonna do. Don't give him the additional advantage. Scoring goals is tough enough without giving the goalie the edge. Carry the puck beside you. Now you have him guessing.
I grew up playing hockey, loving hockey, but as a Bruins fan, hating the Montreal Canadiens. So seeing that the producer of Guy Lafleur's album worked at Suntreader during that same year made me laugh. Was he working on Lafleur's album there? Probably not, but a man can dream. In addition to Guthrie, Moon Martin recorded at Suntreader as well, including his debut studio album Shots from a Cold Nightmare, and his most successful album Escape from Domination, which reached number 80 on the Billboard 200. That album features Rolene and No Chance, both hits of Martin's. I kind of recognized Rolene when I heard it, not No Chance. If you haven't heard of Moon Martin, don't worry.
You mentioned some other, I think I read Arlo Guthrie and Moon Martin. What were some of the other bands that performed and recorded at Suntreader?
Oh, I was afraid of this question.
That's okay.
You know, a lot. Well, Aerosmith came, and what was that name of that Cars. The Cars came, and Bonnie Raitt.
Wow.
I'm sorry.
No, that's
It's escaping me.
no, that's okay. Arrow.
She's a wonderful person, by the way, Bonnie Raitt.
Yeah.
Or she was.
I mean, those two names alone. There's kind of a list of online. There's like a database of the bands that it says recorded there, but they're not. I don't think it's a complete list, or maybe it has to have some certain qualification for it to be on the list. But I had no idea that Aerosmith and Bonnie Raitt recorded there. What do you remember? What were they recording at the studio?
No, I don't remember that. I mean, I'm sorry, and probably it was only a track or something like that. It was probably not anything big. Also, Melanie recorded there, but she never paid, so I don't want to talk about her.
Yeah. Wow. What were all these artists' reaction about Sharon? I like Foghat and Aerosmith, and do you remember?
They all thought it was, well, Aerosmith was fine about it because they kind of live in the area, but Foghat and most others were like, this is the middle of nowhere. They'd walk out of the studio at night and it was dark, and they couldn't understand how come it was dark, because they're from cities or something, and it's always light there. But they walk out of the studio and they say, how come there's no lights anywhere? Bunch of idiots. They weren't a bunch of idiots, but it's just like completely different world.
City slickers. They didn't. Yeah.
Yep,
that's
exactly. There were some I didn't care for. I didn't like Melanie because they rang up a huge tab and then they didn't pay. So.
Well, yeah.
You kind of don't like those kind of people.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sure you might be hung up on some of the bands named in there. Aerosmith, The Cars, Bonnie Raitt. Some people remember Moon Martin. More know who Arlo Guthrie is. Thanks to Slow Ride, many more know Foghat. But Aerosmith, The Cars, Bonnie Raitt? Those are legends. Rock and Roll Hall of Famers. Icons. How did no one know that these bands recorded in Sharon? Well, it's not quite that simple. Unfortunately, soon after I interviewed Jerice, she passed away. I was able to follow up with her husband John and their son Thies. You'll hear both John and Thies in this interview, along with my own son, who happened to be in my arms when they called back. That's life as a stay-at-home dad podcaster.
Bonnie Raitt, yes. Met her several times. The most amazing speaking voice.
Like in what way?
It would sound like a song as she spoke.
She was just visiting, right?
That's right.
Oh, okay. Got it. She was visiting.
A friend of Nick Jameson.
So it sounds like Bonnie Raitt was indeed there, but didn't record. I asked Nick Jameson if he remembered Aerosmith visiting, and he confidently said they did not, and that he'd have remembered. Still, it's not impossible that a member of Aerosmith did visit. Same with the Cars. We're not quite to the true crime chapter of this podcast yet, but we can play a little detective for fun. Aerosmith lead singer Steven Tyler and guitarist Joe Perry met as kids in Lake Sunapee, New Hampshire. In fact, the Lake Sunapee area in New Hampshire played a key role in the formation of Aerosmith. It's where the band played together in its early days. Steven Tyler had, and I think still has, a home there. I've seen it called a compound. Lake Sunapee is less than an hour's drive from where Suntreader was. Not only that, but until just a few years ago, Joe Perry owned an old farm named Sleepy Hollow Farm in Pomfret, Vermont, which borders Sharon. Finally, Foghat and Aerosmith played together on a few occasions. In spring 1975, they played back-to-back concerts at the Boston Garden. It's not a stretch to think that Joe Perry or Steven Tyler, or even another member of Aerosmith, had heard about the studio from someone in Foghat, or even from their record label, and went to check out the studio, especially if they were in Lake Sunapee already. There is also a Vermont connection to the band The Cars. The Cars also originated in Boston. Their co-lead singer, co-founder, and bassist Ben Orr lived in Vermont. According to Joe Milliken, author of Orr's biography, he didn't move there until the late 80s, when Suntreader had already closed up shop. The fact that he liked Vermont enough to move there, Bellows Falls, Vermont to be specific, suggests that maybe he'd been to Vermont before. Bellows Falls is also slightly less than an hour's drive south of Sharon on Interstate 91. Speaking of the end of Suntreader, Jerice Bergstrom said Suntreader's demise was tied to a major change in the recording industry.
Towards the very end of the 70s, the beginning of the 80s, the music business changed, and the big labels which were our clients, our customers, they wanted to record in-house. They wanted to build their own in-house studios for the up-and-coming groups, which is what we appealed to. We weren't there for the Beatles or anything like that, or, the Rolling Stones. We were there for the up-and-comers, and the recording studios wanted to record them on their own. And since it was a technology-driven business, that meant that we would really have to stay ahead and yet have less and less income to do that. So we saw the handwriting on the wall, and that was it. We sold most of the equipment to the Air Force.
Wow.
Believe it or not.
Do you know what they were using it for? I mean, for surveillance or for...
No, I have no idea what the Air
They
Force
probably didn't go around telling you.
No, I don't think so.
Were the neighbors aware of who was there, that there were big rock bands around, or that there were up-and-coming rock
I
bands?
don't think so, Anthony. I think that they pretty much, everybody kept to themselves. The groups didn't really want publicity. There were one or two. Rod Price, for instance, in Foghat, he was a real blowhard, but I mean, he's deceased now, but at the time, he wanted to be the top cock, and he might do things like that, but almost everybody else just was very nose to the grindstone.
So that was that. But according to Nick Jameson, if a couple things had been different, Sharon might be better known today as an even more historic place in music history, kind of like Muscle Shoals, Alabama, or even Nashville.
I think the last time I was there was David Anderson's album. We mixed the Foghat live album there too. Or actually I did. I don't think the other guys were around. And it worked out great for that too. The last time I was there would have been David Anderson's album, which was back in the 80s. And then I heard that it was closed, and I was kind of sad about that. But I don't think John and Jerice, they weren't really, business marketing type people. They were just a couple nice people who liked recording studio. I like the idea of having a recording studio. And if they'd had somebody, I think, to publicize it for them and really work it for them, they could have been huge. Because that was about the time when people were doing things like living in studios, This whole concept of a studio that you go away and live in for a month and make your record was just starting to hit. They could have done. I mean, they didn't have living quarters, like a lot of these studios now. We did a Foghat reunion record recently in Nashville at Dark Horse, and, they had bedrooms and a kitchen and all that stuff. There was a small kitchen and a Suntreader with a microwave. That was about it. So they didn't have that, but this whole idea of going to the country and, hibernating was just about to take off. And I think if they'd had a shrewd business person, they could have been huge. So I was kind of sad to see it go. It was a beautiful room. It was designed by Bolt, Baranek, and Newman, who designed concert halls. I don't know if they'd ever designed a recording studio before, but to me, that gave it a very warm musical sound. The room was live, but it didn't sound echoey or boomy or nasty. It just sounded really nice, the way Disney Hall or someplace like that sounds. So miniature Disney Hall. Yeah, that's the last time I was there. It was in the 80s.
Gotcha. The reference I have for what you're talking about with people living there was the movie about Queen and Freddie Mercury, where they all live in that farm in England while they record the album with Bohemian Rhapsody. So
we went to that farm too. Yeah. We used that farm too.
Really? Wow.
Rockfield. We used it for the third album. They recorded the first album there, actually. It was really primitive then. And then when we did the third album, it was still pretty primitive. We stayed in a little farmhouse hotel near there. But Rockfield, it was a working farm. And again, I used every single space possible. I recorded vocals outside, recorded slide guitar in a pig shed, all that kind of stuff. I think they went upscale. They modernized it. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's like a state-of-the-art place. But at the time, it was very primitive. It had an old broadcast console that would just distort like mad. If you listen to the first Foghat album, you can hear a lot of distortion. Some of it not intentional, right? The lead vocal on Just Want to Make Love to You. I think Dave Edmunds was kind of out of it that day, but, you pushed the board too hard, that's what you got.
There you have it. If you ever thought your hometown was boring, you never know what history you might be living right next to. In my case, I was living across the street from music history. So next time you're out walking through the woods and you come upon something you think is some old rusted piece of junk, take a closer look. Maybe it's the remains of a Fiat some rock stars once beat to a pulp. You never know. And if you do find something and it's connected to someone interesting, do the research and get in touch with them if you can. What you find out could be fascinating. You can find this podcast on every major hosting site, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. If you like it, please share it with others. It's a story I'm passionate about telling, and I'd love as many people to hear it as possible. Finally, if you can, please give it a good rating so more people can discover it. Till next time.